So, Catherine, Princess of Wales, is about to stand beside King Charles at the next major Windsor Castle reception. And the most revealing part of the story isn't that she's taking the spot. It's the 4 words buried at the bottom of the planning brief that basically admit the palace intends to judge her performance and decide what happens next. That's the detail that changes everything, because it means this isn't a scheduling decision or a one-off favor. It's a test, and Camilla knows it. And the fact that the palace has already prepared language for review following the autumn reception tells you more than any official statement ever would. And the timeline around how this decision got made is where the whole thing gets messy, because the official line and the actual sequence of events don't entirely match. So let's start with what's actually happening. The next major reception inside Windsor Castle State Apartments is scheduled for Thursday, October 1st, 2026, and the opening greeting line is supposed to feature Charles I, Catherine II, William III, and Camilla joining later in the program. On the surface, that sounds like a minor adjustment to a formal evening. But when you look at the planning documents and the way the change was discussed at Balmoral back in August, it becomes clear that this was never just about who stands where for 20 minutes. The palace knows exactly what that photograph communicates. Charles, Catherine, William, no Camilla in the first frame. That image alone could suggest the monarchy is already showing the public what comes next. And the most uncomfortable part is that no title needs to change. No announcement needs to call Catherine Queen. The photograph itself could do that work before any palace explanation follows. The decision began taking shape at Balmoral Castle in Scotland on Tuesday, August 18th at roughly 4:30 in the afternoon. A small planning meeting was being held for the first major Windsor reception after summer, and a 3-page brief lay at the center of the discussion. Timings, rooms, guest movement, standard stuff. Then the receiving order appeared. Charles I, Catherine II, William III. Camilla scheduled to join the later part of the program. That single change turned a routine planning document into something far more sensitive. Catherine was not simply attending, she was being placed in the principal female hosting position beside the king. Everyone in that room knew how that could look when cameras arrived. And this is where the story becomes more complicated. William had been pressing for Catherine to take on more visible responsibility for months. His case rested on what Catherine had already done publicly. During the American state visit in September 2025, William and Catherine greeted the visiting president and first lady before accompanying them to Charles and Camilla. Then on March 18, 2026, the same thing happened during the Nigerian state visit. President Bullet Tinubu and First Lady Oi Tinubu were greeted by William and Catherine before the formal welcome by the King and Queen. 2 major state visits, 2 occasions when the Prince and Princess of Wales have been trusted with the first important greeting. For William, that history mattered. Why keep treating Catherine like someone merely filling in? She had already stood at the beginning of major royal occasions. She had handled the introductions, the cameras, the diplomatic pressure, and the scrutiny that comes with representing the crown. Each time she had done what was required, but Windsor on October 1st would be different. Previously, William and Catherine had greeted important visitors before handing the center of the occasion back to Charles and Camilla. This new arrangement would place Catherine beside Charles himself. That distinction was impossible to ignore. King Charles saw it immediately. During the Balmoral discussion, Charles asked whether placing Catherine beside him would look as though Camilla was being pushed aside. The room went quiet. Sir Clive Alderton, the King's principal private secretary, was involved in the planning along with 2 members of the household connected to Windsor arrangements. For a moment, nobody answered. Then William did. He made the argument that changed the direction of the meeting. This was not about changing Camilla's title. It was not about pretending Catherine was already queen. It was about preparing the woman who would one day be expected to stand beside William as queen without needing time to learn the job after the crown had passed to him. One day, William argued there would be no gentle rehearsal. Presidents would still arrive. Prime ministers would still need to be received. Diplomats and foreign royals would still walk through palace doors. The monarchy would not stop for Catherine to become comfortable with responsibilities she had spent years approaching carefully. Preparation had to happen before the responsibility became permanent. And it had to happen while Charles was still there. That was the point that landed. Charles looked back at the running order. He could have stopped the argument with one instruction. Catherine's name could have been moved. Camilla could have been restored to the opening position. The evening could have continued exactly as royal watchers expected. He did not do it. Charles allowed the draft to move forward. That decision changed everything until that moment. The arrangement could still be dismissed as William pushing an idea for his wife. Once Charles allowed it to proceed, the plan carried something heavier. The king himself had allowed it. But there was one person who still did not know Catherine. When William spoke to Catherine the following day, he did not begin with ceremony. He began with the change. It was Wednesday, August 19th. The Balmoral meeting had ended. The revised Windsor plan had survived its first test, and Charles had allowed Catherine's name to remain exactly where William wanted it. But Catherine still believed the October reception would follow the familiar pattern. She and William would greet guests together, then step back when the king and queen took the principal positions. William told her that was not the arrangement for the opening reception. She would stand beside Charles. Catherine understood immediately. Her first question was simple. And Camilla, William explained, would still attend. She would still be queen. She would still join Charles later in the evening. Nothing about her title, precedence, or marriage had changed. But during the opening greetings, Catherine would occupy the principal female hosting position beside the king. That distinction changed the mood between them. Catherine did not celebrate. She did not ask what she should wear. She did not ask how long she would stand there. Her mind went straight to the photographs. She knew what one image could do. Charles on one side, Catherine beside him, William beside Catherine. No Camila in that first frame. The palace could release 10 explanations afterward. But the first photograph would already have traveled. Newspapers would choose it. Television panels would freeze it on screen. Royal watchers would examine the spacing, the expressions, the body language. Some would call it preparation. Others would call it replacement. Catherine saw the problem before the evening had even happened. She suggested they slow it down. Perhaps not this reception. Perhaps the change could be introduced more gradually. Perhaps there was a way to give her more responsibility without making Camilla feel that her place had been taken in front of the cameras. William refused, not angrily, firmly. He had seen this pattern before. Every time Catherine was given more responsibility, her instinct was to make herself smaller so nobody could accuse her of wanting too much. She would step back before anybody asked her to. She would soften the moment before anyone could call it ambition. William believed that instinct had reached its limit. If you keep stepping back, they'll never let you step forward. The sentence landed harder than any formal instruction could have. For Catherine, the issue was never whether she could do the job. She had already stood at the front of major royal occasions. She had greeted visiting leaders. She had walked into rooms where every gesture was watched. The difficult part was accepting that increased responsibility would always produce a reaction. William wanted her to stop treating that reaction as a reason to retreat. He pulled her closer and kissed her lightly on the forehead. It was a small moment, almost private enough to disappear inside the larger argument, but it revealed why William was pushing so hard. To him, this was not about humiliating Camilla. It was not about forcing the public to imagine a new queen before the time came. It was about making sure Catherine did not arrive at that future unprepared. That future was not theoretical. One day, William would become king. On that day, Catherine would not be given months to practice standing beside him. The invitations would continue. State occasions would continue. Foreign leaders would still arrive at palace doors. The monarchy would expect her to know where to stand, how to receive, when to speak, when to step forward, and when to let the sovereign take the lead. William believed the training had already begun. Now he wanted the palace to admit it, and Charles, for the first time, had allowed that argument to move beyond private conversation. Catherine eventually accepted the arrangement, but not with triumph. She accepted it with the caution of someone who understood that every successful step forward could create a new question about the woman standing behind her. That woman still knew nothing. Camilla had not been in the Balmoral planning room when Charles approved the draft. She had not heard William's argument. She had not heard Catherine's hesitation. She had not seen the moment Catherine tried to slow everything down. All she would see was the paper. And that mattered because a conversation can explain intention. A document only shows position. By Thursday, August 20th, the revised Windsor folder had reached the Scottish household. Camilla's office was already working through ordinary preparations for October. Clothing timings, background notes on guests, the normal machinery of a royal reception. Then Camilla reached the receiving arrangement, Charles, Catherine, William. She read it once, then again, and the room changed because somewhere on that page, Camilla expected to see her own name beside the king. It was not there. Her question came quietly. Where is my name? No one rushed to answer her. The answer would turn Catherine's new responsibility into something much more personal. And for the first time, Camilla was about to understand exactly what Windsor was preparing to show the world. Camilla did not react immediately. She stayed with the page. The answer was careful. Her Majesty would still attend the reception. She would still join the king later in the program. Her formal place beside Charles during the later portion of the evening remained unchanged, but she would not lead the opening greetings. That was the moment the issue stopped being administrative. Camilla understood what the wording tried to soften. Catherine was not simply being given another duty somewhere else inside Windsor Castle. She was being placed beside the king at the point when arriving guests, photographers, and cameras would first see the senior members of the family. Her question came quickly. Why is Catherine standing in my place? The explanation did not satisfy her. She was told that the change was part of William and Catherine taking on greater responsibility at Windsor. It was preparation, it was experience, it was another step in the gradual transfer of duties to the next generation. Camilla heard something different, a visible demotion. There was a difference between Catherine greeting guests elsewhere in the castle and Catherine physically occupying the position where the queen would normally be expected. That difference could be explained in palace language. It could be described as continuity, preparation, or support. The cameras would not care. They would show Charles, then Catherine, then William. That image could move through television, studios, newspapers, phones, and social media before anyone had finished reading the official explanation. Millions of people could see Catherine beside the king and form their own conclusion in seconds. That was what troubled Camilla most, not the wording, the picture. Later that evening, the matter followed her back to Burke Hall. There, away from the planning room and the staff handling the Windsor arrangements, Camilla raised it directly with Charles. She did not begin by attacking Catherine. That would have weakened her argument immediately, and she knew it. Instead, she focused on what the arrangement would communicate. If Catherine stood beside Charles during the opening reception, people would treat the image as an announcement, whether the palace intended one or not. Charles answered that Catherine was not becoming queen. Camilla pushed back. That was exactly the problem. Nobody needed to say she was. The photograph could say enough. For a moment, the dispute was no longer about protocol. It was about symbolism. And both of them understood how powerful symbolism had always been inside the monarchy. Then Camilla asked the question that mattered most. Had William requested this? Charles said yes. That answer sharpened the issue. Camilla now knew the pressure had come from the Prince of Wales himself. William wanted Catherine in that position. William had argued for it. William had persuaded his father to let the plan continue. Then Camilla asked something else. Had Catherine requested it? No. The answer changed the shape of the confrontation. Catherine had not gone behind anyone's back. She had not demanded Camilla's place. She had not asked Charles for a special role. In fact, Catherine had been uneasy when William told her what the arrangement meant. That left Camilla with nowhere easy to direct her frustration. She could not honestly present Catherine as the person forcing the change. William was driving it. Charles had approved it, and Catherine, the woman who would stand beside the king, had been the one person trying to slow it down. Charles then reminded Camilla that William and Catherine had already handled important welcoming duties at Windsor during previous state visits. The difference, Camilla answered, was obvious. On those occasions, they had greeted visitors before the king and queen took over the principal ceremonial stage. This time, Catherine would be beside the king instead of the queen. Charles did not argue with that distinction. He understood it. And then he told Camilla something she had not expected to hear. The October reception was not being viewed simply as one evening on the royal calendar. It was being watched as a test. If the arrangement worked, if Catherine handled the position comfortably, and if the evening unfolded the way Windsor hoped, similar responsibilities could be given to William and Catherine. Again, Camilla had entered the conversation believing she was fighting over one reception. Now, she understood that she might be fighting over what came after it. That possibility was more serious than the receiving line. A single evening could be dismissed as an experiment. A successful evening could become precedent. And somewhere inside the Windsor brief, one short sentence was waiting to tell Camilla how real that danger was. The most unsettling part of the Windsor brief was not the receiving order at all. It was the final page. Near the bottom, beneath the practical notes about the October reception, sat a short line that almost disappeared into the paperwork. 4 words carried more weight than anything else in the folder. Reviewed following the autumn reception, Camilla understood immediately why that sentence mattered. It meant the arrangement did not automatically end when the last guest left Windsor Castle. It meant someone intended to look at what happened, judge how Catherine performed, examine how the evening was received, and then decide whether the same structure should be used again. That changed the argument completely. Camilla went back to those words, reviewed following the autumn reception. That was different from temporary. Temporary meant everyone knew when something ended. This did not. There was no promise that Catherine would return to her previous position after October 1st. There was only a review, and a review meant somebody would sit down afterward and decide what Windsor had learned from the evening. For Camilla, that distinction was deeply uncomfortable. Until then, she had been treating the argument as a disagreement over protocol. 20 minutes at the beginning of one reception, an awkward photograph, a decision that could be corrected when the next engagement came around. The final page removed that reassurance. October was not merely being scheduled. October was being evaluated. And suddenly Camilla could see why William had fought so hard to keep Catherine in the position without her beside them. He did not simply want Catherine included. He wanted a clear result. Could she carry it alone? That was the test. And once Camilla understood that, the argument stopped feeling temporary. Camilla would still be queen. Her formal position had not changed, and she would continue appearing beside Charles at major royal occasions. Nothing in the Windsor plan suggested otherwise, but that was exactly what made the situation so difficult. Nobody was taking her title away. What Camilla could see changing was the responsibility attached to it. The opening greetings mattered because they created the first image of the evening. The person beside the sovereign was not simply standing in a convenient place. That position told guests who was sharing the burden of hosting, who was being trusted at the center of the room, and who the palace wanted the public to notice. Catherine had already proved she could handle the surrounding duties. Now Windsor was considering whether she could carry the central one. That was when Camilla's composure finally began to slip. Not because someone had told her she was no longer queen. Nobody had. Not because Charles had asked her to leave the reception. He had not. What overwhelmed her was something quieter. For the first time, she could see a future in which she continued carrying the title while the responsibilities people associated with that title gradually moved somewhere else. There would be no dramatic announcement, no single moment when anyone told her it was over. Just another reception, another duty, another photograph, and Catherine becoming more familiar in a position that Camilla had always regarded as hers. That realization left Camilla emotional, but it did not leave her defeated. Once she had collected herself, she began looking for one final way to stop the evening from becoming a choice between herself and Catherine. The compromise she settled on was designed to preserve Catherine's opportunity without allowing the opening photograph to suggest that the Queen had been replaced. The answer seemed obvious. Why not put all 4 senior royals together? Charles could stand in the center, Camilla could remain beside him, William and Catherine could join them in the same receiving line. Catherine would still gain experience. William would still see his wife taking on more responsibility. Charles would still be able to prepare the next generation, and nobody would have to disappear from the first picture. On paper, it was almost impossible to criticize. It sounded balanced. It sounded respectful. It sounded like exactly the kind of solution a family under pressure should accept. For a moment, it even appeared that the dispute might end there. Camilla could keep her visible place. Catherine could move forward without being accused of taking anything from her. The palace could call it unity, and the cameras would capture 4 senior royals together rather than a picture that invited comparisons. There was only one problem. William did not believe that was preparation. He believed it was protection. William did not explain everything at once. He made one point clear. If Catherine was going to be tested, the palace could not protect her from the test. Charles now had to choose. Camilla had found a way to keep everyone in the picture. William was about to explain why that was exactly what he did not want. William's objection did not leave much room for compromise. If Catherine was going to take on the responsibility, he wanted her to carry it without a protective arrangement built around her. 4 people in the receiving line might look harmonious, but to William, it would hide the very thing the October reception was supposed to measure. Could Catherine stand beside the king, receive guests, handle the pressure, and make the position feel natural without someone else sharing it with her? Charles listened. Then he sided with William. That did not mean Camilla was being pushed out of the evening. Charles made that clear. Her title would remain untouched. Her formal precedence would remain untouched. She would still appear beside him later in the program. She would still be recognized as queen, and nothing about the arrangement would alter her constitutional position, but the opening minutes would stay as planned. Catherine would stand beside Charles. William would stand beside Catherine. Camilla would join later. It was a narrow decision on paper, but emotionally it landed with much greater force. Camilla had asked for a solution that kept everyone visible. Charles had offered something else instead. Security around everything she already possessed, but no reversal of the one change she wanted reversed. That distinction mattered. She could keep the title, Catherine would get the test, and if the test went well, the palace would have evidence that the new arrangement could work. That was the part nobody could soften with protocol. From the palace view, that gave Charles a defensible position. Officials could truthfully say that no constitutional change had taken place. Camilla had not lost rank, title, or access to the later ceremony. Yet the public would not experience the evening through constitutional language. They would experience it through pictures, and those pictures would begin before Camilla entered the line. When Catherine later learned that Charles had refused Camilla's proposal, her reaction was almost the opposite of what some might have expected. She was surprised. Catherine had assumed the argument would end the way so many family disputes end inside institutions built on tradition. The safest arrangement would return. Nobody would be embarrassed. Nobody would have to explain anything. The old picture would survive because the old picture was easier. But Charles had held the line. That unsettled Catherine because it removed the last easy escape. William explained why he believed that mattered. The reception was not supposed to be a rehearsal for a coronation. It was not supposed to humiliate Camilla. It was not supposed to announce a new queen before the time came. It was meant to answer one question. Could Catherine walk into one of Windsor Castle's most important ceremonial rooms, take the principal female hosting position beside the king, and carry the responsibility without needing someone else to make the role feel legitimate? William already believed she could. Charles wanted to see it for himself, and Camilla feared the answer might be yes. For Catherine, Charles refusing to compromise removed the last possibility that the arrangement would quietly disappear before October. For William, it meant the responsibility was finally real. For Charles, it meant he had chosen preparation over the easier option of keeping everyone comfortable. Nothing more needed to be argued that evening. The receiving order remained, and unless somebody persuaded Charles to reopen the decision, Catherine would walk into Windsor on October knowing that the palace was no longer asking whether she deserved more responsibility. It was asking what happened when she was finally given it. By late August, the argument had moved beyond the family and into the machinery of Windsor. The invitations for October still had to be prepared. The state apartments would have to be dressed. Guest notes would have to be checked. Arrival timings settled, staff positions confirmed, and the grand reception room prepared for the opening line. None of that was unusual. What was unusual was the picture those arrangements were now building toward Charles at the front, Catherine beside him, William beside Catherine, Camilla entering later. That order gave the evening attention no amount of polished protocol could completely hide. For Catherine, it was one reception and one responsibility. For William, it was preparation. For Charles, it was a test of whether the next generation could carry more of the visible burden while he was still there to guide it. By then, nobody needed another argument about what the arrangement meant. The argument had already happened. Now came preparation. Windsor now had to turn a controversial decision on paper into an evening that looked effortless. That meant working through details most guests would never notice. The order of arrival, the point where each guest would be introduced, the distance between the senior royals, the moment one conversation ended and another began. Briefing notes would have to be prepared so Catherine knew exactly who was approaching her, which organizations they represented, and which subjects might naturally come up during those first exchanges. Nothing could feel improvised, and yet nothing could look rehearsed. That was the difficulty. Catherine would have to appear relaxed inside a position that had already caused days of private tension before a single guest had entered Windsor. Charles would have his own role to play. If he constantly stepped in redirected conversations or appeared to guide Catherine through every introduction, the test would tell the palace very little. But if he gave her room to handle the greetings herself, everyone watching would see exactly how much confidence he was placing in her. William faced a different problem. He had fought for Catherine to be given the opportunity. Once the evening began, he could not look as though he was managing it for her. He would have to let her carry the responsibility he had insisted she was ready for. And somewhere later in the program, Camilla would enter knowing those opening minutes had already happened without her. By that point, there would be nothing left to argue about. The guests would have seen it. The cameras would have captured it. Windsor would have its first real answer. That is what made the preparation so delicate. The palace was not simply arranging where 4 people would stand. It was creating the conditions for one question to be answered in public. Every ordinary decision made around the reception carried new significance. Where the guests would pause when the first introductions would begin, how the senior royals would enter the room, at what point Camilla would join Charles later in the program. Those details had once belonged to event planners. Now they carried family consequences. Catherine had already tried to step backward once. William had stopped her. Camilla had already tried to redesign the receiving line. Charles had refused, and Charles had already been given every reason to return to the familiar arrangement. He had chosen not to. That left one thing nobody around the table could settle in advance: the room itself. Windsor could prepare Catherine for the moment, but it could not manufacture how natural that moment would feel once the doors opened and real guests began walking toward her. That was what October would decide. The approaching reception, therefore, carried 2 different stories at once. Publicly, it could be presented as another Windsor evening involving the King, Queen, Prince, and Princess of Wales. Privately, every eye would be on those first minutes. Who would guests turn toward first? Would Catherine hesitate before stepping forward? Would Charles appear comfortable with her beside him? Would William remain slightly behind? Or would the 3 of them immediately look like a complete unit? And when Camilla entered later, would the atmosphere change? Those details might seem small. Inside a monarchy, small details become photographs. Photographs become impressions. Impressions become expectations. That is the pressure Catherine would carry into the room. No crown, no new title, no proclamation, just a position. And sometimes a position tells the public more than a proclamation ever could. And this is where everything comes down to one uncomfortable possibility. Catherine may walk into Windsor and struggle with the weight of that position. The arrangement may feel unfamiliar. The photographs may make the change look forced. And if that happens, returning to the old order would be easy. But suppose the opposite happens. Suppose Catherine walks into the grand reception room beside Charles and nobody needs the arrangement explained. Suppose she greets the guests naturally. Suppose Charles appears completely comfortable beside her. Suppose William watches from the same line. And for those opening minutes, the 3 of them look less like an experiment and more like a picture Britain already recognizes. Then Windsor will leave that reception with a much more difficult problem because the question will no longer be whether Catherine was capable of standing there. Everyone will have seen the answer. Thursday, October 1st, 2026. Windsor Castle, the grand reception room. That is the moment everyone is now waiting for. The Windsor doors opening, Charles stepping forward, Catherine taking the position beside him, William joining the line, and the cameras capturing for the first time whether that picture looks temporary or strangely inevitable. Royal watchers, if Catherine walks into that room and proves she can carry the responsibility, should the palace continue giving her that position? Yes or no? Put the answer below. And if Catherine has earned the chance to show what she can do not support her silently. Like this video, subscribe to Palace Files, and share it with someone who follows every move inside the royal family, because the real decision will not be made when the first guest enters Windsor. It comes afterward. The final page of that planning brief contains the words Camilla could not ignore, reviewed following the autumn reception. And in the next video, the focus turns to what happens inside that review. Who gets a voice when Catherine's performance is assessed? And the one question Camilla will desperately want answered: